Welcome to the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology podcast, where we interview the most interesting people in translational neuroscience.
Welcome to another episode of ECNP podcast. My name is Kosma Sakrajda. I am a member of the ECNP Early Career Advisory Panel, and it is my honor to welcome today's guest, Professor Barbara Franke. Professor Franke is Professor of Molecular Psychiatry at Robound University Medical Center, head of the Department of Cognitive Neuroscience, member of the Strategy Board of Donors Institute, and representative of the donors community for medical neuroscience, fellow of several scientific societies, and leader of several international research consortia, honorary professor at Goethe University Frankfurt, Germany, and Aarhus University, Aarhus, Denmark. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
There is a lot of impressive achievements and career milestones, and for sure I didn't mention everything, sorry, but I'm curious because your professorship is in a molecular psychiatry field, and however your doctorate research at the University of Utrecht focused on platelet signaling,
Mm-hmm.
What led you to applied neuroscience?
Well spotted, thanks. Actually, it was quite, well, I wouldn't say coincidence, but a little bit coincidence it was that I ended up in applied neuroscience. I did my PhD in molecular signaling, molecular signal transduction. And after my PhD, and that was, let me say that, in Utrecht University indeed, before I started, a small GTP binding or GTPase had been discovered, and nothing was known about the regulation yet. And I found that very interesting. So I started working on that, and we found quite a lot about the regulation of this small GTPase, RAP1. But when I finished my PhD, I was a little bit disillusioned with science, because what I had been doing was a very, very small piece of the puzzle. And it took me, 4 years to solve a very, very small piece. And I felt that I would rather want to do something that is more applied, that has at least a patient somewhere that I could do this for. So I looked around, and I was thinking of leaving science actually, but then this position came along in Nijmegen, Radboud University Medical Center, and it was an opportunity to help set up a group that was looking into multifactorial genetics, and that was quite new at the time. And so we started a lab, and after a time, my head of department brought me into contact with Jan Buitelaar, who had just moved from Utrecht to Nijmegen as well, and he wanted to look into the genetics of ADHD. So we started collaborating, and I found it so interesting that I stayed in that field.
And going back to your early years or the PhD years, could you name somebody that was your mentor?
Well, if you allow me to look at the whole of my career, I had a few mentors.
Oh,
All
really?
of them were men, actually. My first mentor was my boss of my PhD, Hans Bos, who was a shining example at that time for me of how to do science. He was very engaged. He led a big group, but he had attention to every one of us, and he knew exactly what each project was about and where we were in the progress. I found that really amazing. And he also, what he did very well as a mentor was that he introduced us to his network.
Oh, yeah.
So every time at conferences, he introduced us to people. My next mentor was the head of Department of Human Genetics, Han Brunner, who just went into retirement now. He taught me a lot about management of science, about how to build a career. So I owe him a lot as well. And I guess the most permanent mentor was Jan Buitelaar. He introduced me to the field. He pushed me to take leadership positions. He also opened his network for me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm very grateful to him.
So from what you're saying, what we should look about as a young scientist or early career ones is a mentor or the supervisor who is supportive, paying attention to our study and pushing us further forward to the next project.
Yeah, the last point, pushing you further, I think it has to be tailored to the person. Some people need to be pushed. If I may say, I'm a little bit of an introvert person. I need that people believe in me, that people help me make a step. I needed it. I think I can do it now myself, but I needed it at that time. So I was waiting for the push, but there are other people who needs to be stopped once in a while, helped to focus. So I think a good mentor should see the person and try to see what the person needs.
And going further with your amazing career, currently you are inter alia an elected fellow of Academia Europaea, Royal Holland Society of Sciences and Humanities, Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Science, and coordinator in the Psychiatric Genomics Consortium. It's a lot, really. A member of the board of directors of International Society of Psychiatric Genetics, and so on and so on. So what was a key milestone that brought you where you are now? Because this is really amazing.
Thanks. Well, this is not something that happens overnight, and there are probably a lot of milestones that one could think of. One very important one, well, there may be two. One was that we were just starting to do the first genome-wide association studies for ADHD. And I had just joined the field of ADHD, and we were in a phone call, and Jan Beutler was also there, and he told me, he said to the whole group, well, Barbara can help in that. So I found myself in this international consortium.
So that was the push you talked about.
That was the push, yeah. That was the push, yeah. Working on the first GWAS of ADHD. So that was one of the things where you enter a network, international network, and if you're lucky and the people are nice enough, let's say, you find yourself taken up by this network, and yeah, that helped me to make the next step. And then another step was definitely that we started Impact. We had a molecular genetics network for ADHD, which was led by Steve Ferrone. But at that time, there was very little for adults with ADHD genetics.
Yeah.
So with a number of groups, we decided to start a consortium on that. And that was another milestone, I think, yeah. So, well, yeah.
So it's a pathway, not just
It's
one
a pathway,
of
definitely, yeah.
keystone.
Yeah.
So as you tell us already, you are focused on studying the ADHD. What is, or what was maybe, the main problem you approached? Because me and you are both the basic scientists. We are not a clinicians. So I think we have a similar problems studying the clinical problem.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we really have a problem in that.
Oh, really?
It is. I think it takes all of us to make things happen for the different conditions that we're studying. Indeed, I started with ADHD. Genetics of ADHD was just beginning to be a topic, and I chose adult ADHD because there was very little there. I remember that one of my grants, I submitted a personal grant, was rejected with somebody saying she's going to study adult ADHD. ADHD doesn't exist in adults. So the grant was rejected for that reason, because of the ignorance of the reviewers at that point. So it is very important that we bring together all the people, and that is, I think, the thing that I noted, that you have to bring different disciplines together. And I'm a huge fan of what is called convergence mental health, where many different disciplines work together from the beginning of a study to make sure that every step is in the right direction, and that something that we find in basic science really finds its way into society, into the clinic.
So the key is an interdisciplinary team.
Interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And
from the design of the study, that is important.
Okay. And nowadays, where do we stand with ADHD?
Yeah. At a new beginning. We've come quite far. We have now a course on ADHD, just to mention, that we call modernizing the concept of ADHD. So we're really looking at what needs to be changed in how we're viewing ADHD at the current time. That tells us also the people that are there are from, I think, over 30 countries. And they tell us that there is a lot to gain in terms of ADHD diagnosis and ADHD treatment in different countries in Europe and beyond. So there's a lot there. But at the same time, we're also seeing that the concept of ADHD is changing. ADHD is a disorder, or a condition, I should say, that is not only relevant for healthcare, it's also very important to look at the scientific consequences of ADHD and beyond the clinical label. So we now start to look at, for example, what is the strength of people with ADHD? What are protective factors? What do people need in their work relationships? What do people need at school? So rather trying to see how we can change society so that people with ADHD can find their niche and can shine or can be at their best.
Yeah, so just to make society more inclusive for the ADHD people.
Yeah.
And on the molecular level of the gene, or the gene level you are studying, do we know already what causes or what are probably the genes that are involved in the ADHD development?
We're making great strides. So we are now preparing the third big genome-wide association study with over 140,000 people with ADHD and over 1 million healthy individuals. So from that side, we're learning more about the biology and the molecular biology. With bioinformatics, we can now also, from that, using, for example, the data that is available from single-cell sequencing, we can also go into the substrates, the cellular substrates of ADHD in the brain, and we're making steps in that direction, definitely. So biologically, we're learning what ADHD is. On the other hand, talking about causes, I learned that it's not that easy. I don't know whether we should really talk about causes anymore. We have genetic predispositions, and we have environmental factors that are either conducive to driving you in the direction of ADHD and increasing severity, or driving you into a protective environment that shields you from developing at least severe symptoms. So I guess you could call it causes, but it's factors that contribute.
I've got one more question about the ADHD, because it's really interesting and you have so many different researches in the field that I have to ask it. You and your team are also involved in the brain imaging genetics, yeah? And in this study, if I understand it right, you are trying to map the gene to disease pathways in the brain. And the brains of the people with ADHD differ from the healthy, or let me say, non-ADHD ones, because as you mentioned, we should talk about the ADHD more maybe like a spectrum, or?
Yeah, a spectrum, where spectrum is also a factor that is associated with disease. I would call it, perhaps we should call it, I'm trying to call it a condition, but I think at a certain point we will talk about a trait. Is the brain altered in ADHD? Yes, a little. We see that certain parts of the brain are a little bit smaller in people with ADHD than in people without ADHD. And that is something that we only see when we look at very, very large numbers. And we're doing that in the context of the Enigma consortium. I'm a founding member of Enigma because I really believe in this consortium team science spirit, where we put together the data from all the different studies in the field and then look again what is really there. And we see that but in children, and especially in the young children, we see differences.
Mm-hmm.
And when people mature, these differences in the brain diminish, while their ADHD doesn't. So it's not the whole story. Looking at the structure of the brain is definitely not the whole story.
So it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly, yeah.
And as you said, you're involved in a consortia, but not only one.
Yeah.
Because you are involved also in Prime and Impact, for example. And both of those consortia are emphasizing the comorbidity characterizing the psychiatric disorders, including the condition ADHD. Are we able to predict the occurrence of these symptoms or not? And what are the most common ones?
Yeah, for ADHD, let me say it's for ADHD, comorbidity or co-occurrence of other conditions is the rule rather than the exception. So we see co-occurring psychiatric disorders in at least 75% of the individuals. If you look at somatic conditions, it's also very high. And in that we see obesity, cardiometabolic conditions in particular that play a role. But now that we're looking also into older age, we also see neurodegenerative conditions being associated with ADHD. Can we predict them? Not really, not yet, at least. We're trying to build multimodal prediction models where we take into account behavior, but also genetic predispositions. We may find something there. For example, for obesity, we did genome-wide association studies in which we combined the ADHD genetic factors with genetic factors for obesity and body mass index. And we find that the strongest findings fall into pathways that are related to dopamine, which sort of may make us consider obesity in ADHD something like a substance use condition. So it may be that a lot of the co-occurring conditions are actually based on behaviors, at least when it comes to cardiometabolic conditions. Yeah, but there is a lot of genetic sharing as well. So
you also told us about this course that you're leading with collaboration of ECNP ADHD network, which you are a chair, a modernized concept of ADHD, and the course is designed to be suitable for clinicians, but also a basic scientist, isn't it? And what could these groups obtain from the course? It is a platform for example, interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary transfer of knowledge, or?
yeah, so the course starts with the idea that we will bring people information, basic information about state of the art of diagnosing and treating ADHD, but also about the science of ADHD. It's a 2-year course where we have online meetings every month with lectures from experts in the field, and then also colloquia where we more discuss on-site current issues in ADHD. The cast that we have now, we have 50 people that follow the course. Most of them are clinicians. We selected them from over 140 registrations, and we tried to pick people for this first course that can really be multipliers. So people that are clinician but also teach at university, for example, or researchers that also teach. So we find it very important that we can bring the information on ADHD out fast, because there is a great need to do that. And it's both clinical information but also research information. I think both for clinicians but also for scientists, this is important.
Yeah, of course. And let me go back to your career for a moment. As we spoke before, you are currently a professor of molecular psychiatry, but also a head of departments, coordinator, the head of consortia, the chair of a lot of institutions. So you are also a member of ECNP Scientific Program Committee and Scientific Advisory Board. So I think you are one of the best person I can ask. How has the world of applied neuroscience changed over the recent years? I know that is a big question.
Yeah. I think the most important change is really that we consider ourselves a group that is interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary and can learn from each other. So it's like the ivory towers that we build around our own disciplines have fallen. And that is very good. We realize that we need the other much more than we did before to really understand what psychiatric conditions are. I think that is the biggest change, and ECNP has a big role in that. They, from the get-go, they brought together clinicians and researchers. So making the environment suitable for the work that we're now doing is very important, something that ECNP does.
And what do you see as a main challenge for the neuroscience applied today?
Continuing on this path, understanding ourselves not only relevant to healthcare, but also to other parts of life of the people that we're aiming to help. But also very concretely, what is happening is that animal work with animal or research with animals is very much under pressure in Europe. And I think neuroscience is one of the last disciplines where we can really step away and use alternatives for the research that we're doing, because we need the intact brain to study behavior. We can't do that with organoids. But I think going to find or pushing for alternatives is good, but abandoning animal research too early will not be good for science. That is one of the concrete challenges that I see.
And as you said, I think that every scientist sooner or later came to the wall. The wall could be as well the animal model or the problems with that. In your career, did you meet such a wall, especially in the ADHD subject?
There are a lot of walls. Huh?
Yeah, I know.
And everybody experiences them. I think that is very important to realize. And walls for me, well, my first wall was indeed that I didn't want to continue in science. But then I tried to find a position in industry, for example, and I was rejected by several companies. So these are walls that you run into. I was rejected first when I applied for a professorship. At that point, I realized that, for example, I had neglected to be visible in my own institute. So that was one of the reasons why I wasn't picked, because I wasn't part of the community of Radboud University. So there are both in your own research subject, but also in your career, there are a lot of walls that you hit. But the spirit of science and the excitement that we have with the subject that we're working on, with the possibility to do science, the freedom of doing science, and really pushing the boundaries, that is the thing that we have to keep in mind, and that keeps us going, I think.
Yeah, I know. But if you could advise an early career scientists how to stay that motivated, how to keep that excitement about science, because I think often these walls are very overwhelming for us. And as you said, and you also experienced, the one point or another, scientists are thinking about leaving the science. So what kept you motivated and stuck with your excitement, let's say?
So at the point when I switched fields, I really was thinking, if I want to go on in science, it has to be something that is closer to a patient, something that I can make my grandmother understand why I'm doing this. And I found that, and that kept me going. And I think from that point onwards, it's really, well, thinking hard of why you're doing things, and not getting demotivated, not getting disheartened by setbacks, because they are part of everything.
Yeah.
They are part of life. And really realizing that and going from day to day. Nowadays I see a lot of people, a lot of young people who are overwhelmed by the fact that they have to meet this and this and this to become an associate professor, assistant professor, associate professor, get a permanent position. But yeah, it's the spirit of science and the excitement that we feel. That is the thing that drives us forward and that overcomes these walls. Yeah. I'm convinced of that.
And you are also the upcoming chair of the ECNP Scientific Program Committee, isn't it? What is your vision for the future of applied neuroscience and the ECNP?
Yeah, ECNP is really a platform where people can meet from different disciplines and can form connections. And for me, setting up the symposia in that way, for example, is an important factor. So trying to, in a symposium, get together different disciplines and connect them, really connect them. How are molecular pathways linked to a certain animal model to a certain behavioral phenotype that we see. That, I think, is very important. So the environment, having people come together, giving them room to interact, giving them room for networking is an important one. And then making the science really accessible and multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary.
And because from the previous years and this year as well, I think ECNP is more open to the non-European based researchers.
Yeah.
And do you think this is the way to include or improve the discussion, improve the space for the discussion, to exchange the knowledge?
Yes, I think so.
That will be the direction for the next years, to open more?
I hope so. I don't have all the powers, even as a program director, but where I can influence that, I will. I feel that this is really also an important subject to go on with and get more non-European scientists, not only from the US, into this field and help us build a global research community.
And I think the major part of the ECNP activity are the early career scientists. Do you think, or do you see any more space for the activities for early career scientists in the future?
ECNP is already doing a lot. Now the next step is a ECNP Academy, where early career scientists will get the opportunity to build their home in ECNP even more. So the focus is already there. New initiatives come along every day. And I think putting it back in your shoes, the ideas that you come with are very important for ECNP and making the situation or the atmosphere for early career scientists even more welcoming.
Thank you so much. And to sum up, what can be a main advice you can give to the new PhD student?
Think about why you joined the field. Remember the enthusiasm that you have for science and live it. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. My guest was Professor Barbara Franke. I invite you to listen to our other episodes and keep updated with ECNP. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the interviewee and not necessarily the official position of the ECNP. And of course, this should not be the basis for clinical treatment decisions.